What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the second last matchup show of the season. Can't believe how quick it has come close to an end here, but my Eagles are still alive. Still plenty of money to be won in both the Pick'em world and the DFS world as well, of course, as props. And that's kind of if you're new here to the show, that's kind of the theme of the show. We're doing everything here. We're covering it all, covering picks, props, DFS, and we're also just talking football at some point, right? Like we all clearly love to watch football and kind of understand just what exactly is going on the field, and understanding the chess match that's going on between the coaches, to me, makes watching the game that much more fun. So where I actually want to start this show, we only have 2 games to get through, so it should be a pretty quick show relative to most of the previous matchup shows that we've done here together. So where I want to start is actually just kind of talking about last week's games and how so much of what we expected came to fruition, right? In that Houston-Kansas City game, we talked about how Houston really struggled in yards after the catch. Travis Kelce has a huge game in large part because of what he did after the catch. We talked about how Spagnuolo probably blitzed the crap out of C.J. Stroud. He blitzed over 48% of the time. Those blitzes led to 3 sacks and pressure 57% of those dropbacks. You're going to have success as a defense when you're pressuring the quarterback that often and getting home with that pressure. So a lot of what we expected happened last week, but there was one major curveball. So I wanted to start here because it gets right to this first game, Philly and Washington. So got StatsHub up here from last week. Reminder, if you're new to StatsHub, you can search week 20 was this past week, week 19, the wild card round. So you can go to any week that you want, but I'm particularly interested in looking at the stats from last week. And notice Washington came into the game first in man coverage rate in the second half of the season. They played man 68% of the time against Tampa Bay. They like to blitz. They like to play single high. Well, this game against Detroit, they played single high 30% of the time, and man coverage less than 20% of the time. 74% zone coverage from Washington. Just an incredible changeup. Now, there are a couple reasons why they may have done this. And as we try to answer the question of how Washington is going to defend Philly, we need to start by understanding why Washington threw this big curveball in the first place. So let's do exactly that. I'm going to share a second StatsHub tab here with you guys. And let's go to passing efficiency. And what I'm going to look at here, let's go to DYR, and you'll see we got Lamar Jackson at the top, then we've got Jared Goff. But if we filter, I should say, by man coverage instead. So again, reminder, we were expecting a lot of man coverage from Washington just because that's what they like to do as a defense. The problem with that is, look who led the league in DYAR against man coverage. Jared Goff, 837, a DVOA over 40%, over 100 estimated points added, and over 0.46 EPA per dropback from Jared Goff, also first by a mile. So why didn't Washington play all of that man coverage? Because Jared Goff, more likely Ben Johnson, and this Detroit offense just too damn good. They had too many answers against man coverage, so Washington felt the need to change things up. Okay, that then gets to the question, are they going to see something similar in the matchup with Philly? Well, let's take a look here. 7th in EPA per dropback against man coverage is Jalen Hurts, 461 DYR, 17.8% DVOA. At this point, I also want to bring up, let's look at the receiving numbers. And if we go to coverage, we're on player here. I want to just sort by Philly. And you'll see against single high, wait a minute. There's something else that I don't want here. I want to get rid of man. So just Philly overall coverage here. A.J. Brown, 3.5 yards per out run against single high, 3.3 against 2 high. Notice, though, these man yards per out run and zone yards per out run splits. 3.9 against man, 2.4 against zone. So A.J. Brown thrives against man coverage. Dallas Goedert as well. 2.9 yards per out run against man, 1.5 against zone, 3.2 against single high, 1.1 against 2 high. So if we have an expectation that Washington is going to play a lot of man coverage, A.J. Brown stands out. Dallas Goedert really, really stands out. Now, even if we are expecting zone, I will tell you ahead of time, I still really like Dallas Goedert. I just think he's been a kind of growing part of the offense as we've gotten later and later in the season. And it seemed to me like he became the easiest answer in the past game. A.J. Brown was having some trouble creating separation. Maybe that was just due to the conditions of the field, but regardless, put the ball in Dallas Goedert's hands, let him do his thing after the catch. Remember, he also had that long screen pass that nearly went for a touchdown that was called back due to an ineligible man downfield. So it could have been an even bigger game for Dallas Goedert, and I do think he will be heavily involved regardless. His prop line, 36.5 receiving yards right now. I think that's way too low, no matter what kind of coverage we expect. But if we expect man, should be A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert. If we expect zone, notice Devonta Smith goes from 2.2 yards per out run to 2.7. He also is the only beneficiary of more too high, 2.4 to 2.6. All right. With that, let's go back to the passing. Remember, Jalen Hurts, really good against man coverage. But how does he do against zone coverage? Let's wait till this filters. Okay. Coverages. Now I'm going to go to zone instead. And let's once again take a look at these efficiency numbers so we get the very unique and exclusive numbers to DVOA, DYAR. And here, let's sort the opposite way. Okay. Jalen Hurts, negative 96 DYAR, negative 21% DVOA, almost negative 0.1 EPA per dropback. So the answer is yes. If you are Washington's defensive coordinator and you are looking at this data, it is very clear it might be another week to play zone. And the very interesting thing about this as well, let's, well, you know what? I'll just leave the zone filter on for a second. If we go over to the defense tab instead, and now we're just looking at how defenses defend against these different coverage types, let me go to efficiency here. Let me sort by EPA per dropback. You'll notice Washington, not the worst, right? This is with man coverage. So it's actually, or this is with zone coverage, I should say. So 0.04 EPA per dropback allowed. That's not too bad. Higher numbers here are worse. You can see New England, Carolina, New York, obviously worse defenses. So they're not bad when they play zone, even though they haven't played a ton of zone. Again, this is kind of weird because if we go to man coverage, there's definitely a question here of why has Washington been playing so much man this season? They're not actually that good at it. And as they got better throughout the season, they started playing more man coverage. They started getting better. And yet on the season, you can still see EPA per dropback against man coverage. They're the fourth worst at 0.14. So 0.04 EPA per dropback, almost 1.5 EPA per dropback against man coverage. Very interesting. But to me, what it says is they are capable of just totally flipping the style, right? A lot of the times, if you have a team that plays 60% man and all of a sudden they're playing 20% man, they're probably playing a coverage that they're not as equipped to play and play well. It's not the case with the flip that we saw last week. And I think there's a very good chance we see them do the same thing this week. So I think Devonta Smith is very interesting. On the DFS side, like because we have this uncertainty of how Washington's going to play it, we also have uncertainty around, is A.J. Brown actually healthy or not? How much of a step forward in usage is Dallas Goedert going to take? From a DFS side, I think the answer is really simple. You just kind of go against ownership. Wherever the field thinks, wherever the field is confident in this passing game, you just take a different route. On the prop side, though, I do think the best one kind of all week for me has been Dallas Goedert, and I do still very much like it. It's now up to 38.5, though, so I already have a bunch of picks in with Goedert, some 34.5, some 35.5, and then a few at 36.5. I may just be content with those now that it's up to 38.5. But Devonta Smith now just 48.5 here on Underdog. So that might be my new favorite. If you look at the prop tool, look at the pick'em tools, you will notice we are very high on the Eagles in general. That has been the case for weeks now. we're very high on them once again here. And part of that is Washington's defense just, as you see, like they haven't been that good, right? 18th in EPA, or 18th highest EPA allowed zone, 4th highest in man. So it's not like they have a quote unquote good answer here, but I do think there's a very straightforward answer in terms of playing away from Philly's strengths and into their weaknesses, playing more zone coverage and forcing Hurts to beat them that way. So the next question, of course, though, with how Washington is going to defend Philly is in the running game. And again, here, there are some very interesting things we can learn. So Washington allowed some explosives to Saquon Barkley in both games. In fact, let me get rid of this filter first. I'm going to clear all the filters. Washington and Philly played in weeks 11 and week 16. So I want to bring up these 2 weeks here in StatsHub, week 11 and week 16. And I want you guys to notice, first of all, let's go to rushing. Let's go to efficiency, and let's look at some of this explosive stuff, okay? So in these 2 games, they allowed 235 explosive rushing yards. 235 rushing yards in 2 games, especially to just a running back, like that'd be fairly high, right? But 10 explosive runs, so 10 runs of 10 plus yards in just 2 games, 235 explosive yards, 3 explosive touchdowns. And that came when the second half of that week 16 game, remember that was when Jalen Hurts went down early. On the first Kenny Pickett series, Saquon broke a long touchdown run, and then they kind of shut him down the rest of the game, forced Kenny Pickett to beat them. And by the way, I think like a very important point here, as we talk about that game, let's remember, taking away Saquon Barkley is a lot easier to do when all it means is that you have to pass against us. When it also means that you might get beat by Hurts keeping the ball and running. What happened on the opening drive last week in the Philly and Rams game? Los Angeles overreacted to the threat of a Saquon run. Hurts kept it. Jordan Mailata didn't even have a guy to block, and he gets the 40-plus yard touchdown run. So it is a very different task to, quote-unquote, take away Saquon when the answer can still be beating you on the ground with Jalen Hurts' legs. Anyway, lots of explosive runs here, 12.7% explosive rush percentage, 45.6 success rate, not crazy. But what I really want to highlight is in these games, just a 5.1% stacked box percentage and rate. And in week 16, even as they were able to key on the run, they really didn't stack the box. 2.6%, just one stack box run. And that is a little bit of what we saw last week. The Rams had a lot of trouble figuring out exactly what to do. Dan Orlovsky has talked about this. I think Orlovsky's exact quote was something along the lines of, I've never seen a team approach stacked boxes as an opportunity for explosive plays. Like most teams are an opportunity for explosive plays in the running game. A lot of the time, a stacked box is viewed as an opportunity for an explosive play in the passing game. Usually it means there's single high or maybe even zero high safeties. Usually it means man coverage on the outside. The Eagles see a stacked box, and in Saquon's words, it's like, man, if we just get that blocked right, there's nobody back there. I'm gone. And that's what we saw with the Rams. And it seems like Washington was kind of ahead of that curve, and they don't want to stack the box. The problem when you don't stack the box is now you open up the opportunity for just successful run after successful run after successful run. So especially with the way the Eagles block things up. And as long as Hurts is healthy, I think we will see a lot of that. Which leads me to my next favorite pick of this game here. Jalen Hurts over 30.5 rushing yards is really, really low, and definitely baked into this line is an expectation that we don't really know what's going on with his leg. There's an expectation that he's hobbled to the point where maybe the Eagles can't call as many design quarterback runs. Finished with 7 for 70 in that Rams game, 6 for 36 against Green Bay. Games prior, 41, 45, 59, 29. So the one miss was a yard and a half short. 39, 39, 56, 67, 37, going all the way back to that Cincinnati game in late October. So 30.5 has basically been automatic for Jalen Hurts. I still think it's really, really good. I think if anything, this is like overreacting to the knee injury. the fact that we already know this early in the week that he's going to be playing makes me think it's probably okay. It's probably okay. And part of that too is like so many of his runs are he just keeps it and has a lane. Even if he's not quite as fast, even if he can't cut laterally, he can keep the ball and run in a straight line through a hole. So I think the design run will still be a part of it. I also think when you see quarterbacks hobbled, what's one thing we know? They're less likely to be given a spy in the passing game. So if you give Hurts a lane right up the middle through the pass protection, he'll still be able to scramble. So I like the over 30.5 rushing yards for Jalen Hurts. Anything else on the Philly side of things? I don't believe so. You know what? I will also mention because Washington kind of learned the hard way, if you will, not to stack the box against Saquon. I do think it's somewhat reasonable to believe that, number one, 129.5 rushing yards. I think I saw that that's the highest in years and years and years on DraftKings Sportsbook. Maybe even the highest ever in DraftKings Sportsbook history for a player's rush line. I don't want to say that it's too high. I would lean under here, but I'm more interested in pointing out all season long, the longest rush, whether it's been Gibbs, Saquon, Henry, it's lived at 17.5 is like the high end. 21.5 is really, really high. But the biggest effect it has, we nailed last week, like kind of led off the show kind of talking about what we got right last week. How about the fact that we had the Saquon longest rush all the way up to over 59.5 at 13.76x, something like that? He hits that twice. Well, that's down to 11.4. The 49.5 that was over 7x, that's under 6x now. So every single thing here has moved down. And I think that this matchup is worse for the explosive run. And I also think part of the explosive run kind of hypothesis, if you will, last week was the snow on the ground. It doesn't look like there's going to be snow on the ground this week. So definitely less interested in the Saquon longest rush ladder than I was last week, even though, look, it's Saquon. If he breaks another long one, I'm not going to be surprised. I'm going to be jumping with joy as an Eagles fan. Other stuff on Philly, I should say now moving on to Philly as a defense. I think the first thing that I will point out here is Philly, too, has shown a flexibility with how they're going to guard. So let's go to passing defense, and now let's go to coverages. And I want to once again take a look at these rates. They, too, like Washington, have a history of being very man-heavy, very single-high heavy. Biggest difference is they don't like to blitz. Philly, very low on the blitz rate spectrum. And we saw that against the Packers. They very rarely blitz against the Packers. Whoops, that's not what I want. I want week 19 here. Okay. So against the Packers, did we see a lot of man coverage and single high? And the answer is no. We saw 72% too high. We saw 44% man coverage to 56% zone coverage. So some tendencies breakers there. I think part of that is very positive game script throughout. So maybe in the second half specifically, they maybe eased up and played a little bit more prevent defense. In fact, we can actually check this. Let's do this. Let's go. What am I looking for? Play situation. Oh, game. Duh. Quarters. First and second quarters. Let's see. Was that any different for Philly out of the gates? No. Look at that. 88% too high in the first half, 53% zone. So they clearly came out just really, really selling out to take away Green Bay's strength. Remember, we talked a lot about that game going in, saying, Green Bay has this major strength, and that is explosive plays in the passing game. One issue for them was that they didn't have Christian Watson. That was going to hurt, but Philly still gave them a ton of respect in that regard and sold out to make sure they didn't get beat by the explosive pass. That's exactly what they were able to do. And then last week, let's clear those filters again. They went right back to their bread and butter against the Rams. The one difference is they did blitz a little bit more than they typically do. I do think that was probably related to the conditions and the fact that when the snow's on the ground and you don't really have good footing, it's very hard to get pressure on the quarterback just from a standard pass rush. So here in week 20, we saw a return to 68% man coverage, 76% single high against the Rams. My guess is we continue to see that here, especially because that has been worse for Jaden Daniels. He's done better against zone this season, but we especially have seen the fact that Jaden Daniels crushing against the blitz. So I think we will see a low blitz rate from Philly. I think they'll try to rush the passer in disciplined passing lanes, try to prevent those scrambles, but also maybe leave a linebacker or two as a spy, just like Tampa did against Jaden Daniels to help prevent the scrambles. The last time these two teams met, Jaden Daniels had a big-time scrambling second half in that big comeback for them. I think the Eagles will learn from that for sure. So that's pretty much it in terms of what I have on that side. But there are two bets that I love in this game, absolutely love. So let's go take a look at those. The first one is Austin Ekeler, and I want over 19.5 rushing yards. So Ekeler, in his return last week, 6 carries, 47 yards against Detroit, including a 35-yarder, 8 for 27 against Tampa. That's the key one for me. 8 for 27 against Tampa when Brian Robinson Jr. had just 10 for 17. I think this Philly run defense is a little bit more like the Tampa Bay run defense in that it's a very solid front, extremely solid in the interior with Jalen Carter, Milt Williams, and of course Jordan Davis against the run. So I think they might prefer the explosiveness, the speed of Austin Ekeler, but I also think this is just game script. If you assume Philly has a lead, which I'm okay with that assumption, I think it's the more likely route, or at least it's neutral to the point where Washington wants to stay aggressive offensively. They want to move the ball. They want to have Ekeler on the field to give them that extra piece in the passing game that Ekeler has really thrived in that role for them. Blake 4 for 41 on 4 targets against Detroit. I just think he's going to be on the field more. And so when the handoffs happen, they happen to be to Austin Ekeler. 19.5 is really, really low. He has very steadily hit that. And you have to kind of go back to the beginning of the season to when both he and Brian Robinson were on the field together, when they were healthy together in the early weeks of the season. 38, 35, 67, 21, 17, 52, 42, 44 rushing yards. So some of those latter weeks came with no Brian Robinson Jr., but a lot of those early ones, they were with both. He's just going to be a part of it. And where exactly do we have him projected? I know it's definitely a better number than 19.5. We have 6 carries, 28.7 rushing yards. I actually think we might be low on the carries there for Ekeler. So the fact that we already have him projected for 28.7 when his line is 19.5 just screams awesome play to me. And then Olamide Zaccheaus is at 21.5 receiving yards. I like the under there. I don't want to take it as a one-off. I wanted to pair it with over 11.5 receiving yards for Jamison Crowder. If we get any reception numbers for Crowder, I'm also going to like that. I even don't even hate the touchdowns for Crowder. Let's take a look back in StatsHub here at why I like this so much. Let's go to players. We've got week 20 up here already. And I want to go to Washington. For most of the season, Crowder has kind of been an afterthought. But last week, and actually I should say, and Zaccheaus has been kind of a main piece of the receiving game in the second half of the season, particularly. But last week, not necessarily a changing of the guard, but notice, we sort here by routes run. Just 13 for Zaccheaus, 11 for Jamison Crowder. Crowder had 2 receptions on 2 targets for 25 yards. Solid. Zaccheaus was really bad. Zaccheaus was struggling mightily to get any separation whatsoever. This is the closest they've been in routes in a long, long, long time. And on the season, Zaccheaus really, really struggles with the kind of coverages that Philly plays. Jamison Crowder much better in those splits. And I think there's an element here of just trusted veteran. They already have Zach Ertz. We know they lean on Ertz in those key moments. You need a guy to get open. You need someone to make a play, get a key conversion. They want Ertz on the field. I think they also feel similarly about Jamison Crowder. So I would expect Crowder to be on the field quite a bit in this game. And DVOA adjusted fantasy points against shows Philly is an atrocious matchup for everybody, with one exception. Negative 16% for quarterbacks, negative 26% for running backs, negative 30% for tight ends. So they're very good at taking away Zach Ertz. He's the security blanket. Philly might be able to blank him. Minus 7% for wide receiver ones, minus 22% for wide receiver twos, but plus 10% for wide receiver threes. We just saw Demarcus Robinson have a very big game against this Philly team. It might be Jamison Crowder's time, and all he's got to do is get to 11.5 here. So over 11.5 receiving yards for Jamison Crowder, under 21.5 receiving yards for Olamide Zaccheaus, and over 19.5 rushing yards for Austin Ekeler. I think those are three really, really solid plays. Pair them with Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, whatever you want. Jalen Hurts, maybe it's all three. Maybe you just got yourself a 6-pick play from just one game. So plenty to like there. I think that covers it for that game. I don't believe I have anything else to go over. As far as Crowder is concerned, I don't want to say he's a great DFS play, but really, really cheap in Showdown. So particularly if you're looking for a spend down option that helps you get a lot of expensive pieces, as many expensive pieces as possible from this game, I do think Jamison Crowder works in that regard, which is a great time to remind you guys or let you know for the first time, we have 2 free DFS contests running this week, sponsored by DraftKings. DraftKings is putting up $10,000 total, $10,000 in prizes, free to enter. All the instructions are in the FTN Discord. Just go to the NFL channel. In fact, they're in any FTN Discord channel. So you don't even need a DFS subscription to learn how to get into that contest. You just need some FTN subscription, and then you'll be able to learn how to get in there. So ftnfantasy.com/pricing. If you've already been toying with the idea, make sure you get in now. And actually, I can give you guys 25% off with promo code DK. Just DK for DraftKings, 25% off. Now's the best time that there's ever been for you to sign up for FTN. And that still includes, for this final week, we've got contest sims for every main slate that is free with a part of your DFS or VIP subscription last week to try those before the price jumps like crazy on contest sims. So if you've ever been curious about contest sims, want to know what they're all about, you can use them for this conference championship main slate, which should be a really fun one, by the way. We've done quite well this season on 2-game slates. All right, time to move on to this final game, Kansas City and Buffalo. And this is a bit of a tough one to figure out because we have 2 teams where we are projecting both offenses pretty far under the market. But it's Josh Allen, it's Patrick Mahomes, it's Andy Reid, Travis Kelce. Like, how do you bet against these guys at this time of year? So I don't necessarily know how I want to approach these guys just yet, but let's get into some coverage stuff and figure it out that way. To start, Kansas City is a bit of an outlier in the sense that they are heavy man coverage, but they're also heavy too high. Most teams that play a lot of man skew towards single high, and most teams that play a lot of zone skew towards too high defenses. Kansas City kind of bucks that trend. As we talked about last week, they came into the week really struggling in the second half of the season with explosive passes. And there were a couple explanations for that. Like, number one was they were potentially over-adjusting for the fact that they were extremely weak early in the season against tight ends. But I think the best answer is they were just missing one of their best corners in Watson. Watson comes back last week. They do much, much better against Nico Collins. They control those explosive passes. Dalton Schultz has another good game. So tight ends certainly appear to be a good way to attack them now at this time in the season. Again, the problem is Buffalo has not gotten a whole lot of production from their tight ends. In fact, they haven't gotten a whole lot of production from any one guy. Like Khalil Shakur is their most productive receiver here in the postseason. And what do his games look like? on the DraftKings side, he's been like 11, 12 DraftKings points, 6 for 67 this past week, 6 for 61, just 13 total targets in the 2 games. No touchdowns, no real threat of a touchdown. It's very, very strange. In fact, if we go through our projections here at FTN, the list of potential pass catchers is extremely long. Like let's use Philly as a counterexample. We are projecting targets for Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley, Jahan Dotson, Kenny Gainwell, and Grant Calcaterra. Yeah, Johnny Wilson will probably be on the field a little bit. Maybe Isiah Smith gets on the field. Who knows? But we pretty much know where all the targets are going. Let's read the list for Buffalo. Shakur, Kincaid, Mac Hollins, Curtis Samuel, Dawson Knox, Keon Coleman, Ty Johnson, James Cook, Amari Cooper, Ray Davis. It's a much, much, much longer list. Consequently, we only have 2 of these guys projected over 10 DraftKings points. We've got Shakur at 11. We have James Cook at 11.4. It's just really, really hard to project production from any one of these guys. Keon Coleman, very interesting, although last week we had him projected at 7.9. Really didn't like his role, didn't like how conservative that Buffalo offense was. So we've brought his projection down all the way to 5.5. That's also partly giving a lot of credit to this Kansas City defense. But man, like it's just ugly across the board for these Buffalo projections. And Kansas City isn't a whole lot better. They're split at the running back position. Kareem Hunt, Isiah Pacheco, both of those guys projected under 10 DraftKings points. You also have Samaje Perine stealing production from those guys because of his role in the passing game. Travis Kelce leads the way in projection at 13.3 DraftKings points, but then Xavier Worthy, 12.7. And then another really long list. You've got Marquise Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Perine, Noah Gray, Kareem Hunt, Isiah Pacheco, Juju Smith-Schuster, Justin Watson. Which of these guys could really take a step forward and actually produce? This is also a difficult question to answer because if we go back to StatsHub here and we look at, let's look at how they defended in week 20. We know on the season, talked a lot about it, especially in the second half of the year, a lot of too high. In fact, the highest too high rate in the second half of the season, 5th highest man rate. They like to blitz. But then week 20, and we didn't necessarily get the same stuff from them going up against this Houston team. So let's take a look at their coverage data in this one. So the number one thing that they stuck to is they did still play a lot of too high. And this was very much, I think, expected in the sense that it's very obvious if you're Spagnuolo, like the number one thing you have to do is just prevent the explosive play to Nico Collins. If they could do that, they were going to win the game. They were able to do that. They were in too high a lot. No surprise there. They still did play a good amount of man coverage. So I think maybe more than some of the other teams, like we can't expect them to play too high. We can't expect them to play a bunch of man coverage, especially now that they have their best cornerback. So why don't we do that? Why don't we go to the receiving side and see who on Buffalo stands to benefit from the too high rate and the high man rate. They also like to blitz. Now, Josh Allen has been so good against the blitz. Like it wouldn't surprise me at all if we saw a much less aggressive game plan, at least as the blitz is concerned. So let's go here. I want players. I want to sort by just Buffalo. Filter to just Buffalo, I should say. And let's go to coverage and let's see what this data shows us. So first, man coverage. We know Amari has been pretty good. We know Keon Coleman has been pretty good, although that gap has closed a little bit. But Shakur better against man or better against zone than man, so he doesn't necessarily benefit from that. Like a lot of these guys, really not much of a change at all. Too high, similar story here. This is where it gets pretty bad for Keon Coleman. He's been more than double his yards per route run against single high than too high. Same with Dawson Knox. James Cook maybe a little bit better. Mac Hollins a little bit better. Ty Johnson a little bit better against too high. Kincaid, again, like kind of neck and neck up to 1.9. Shakur and Amari Cooper near the top here. But absolutely nothing stands out. So it's very difficult to predict exactly where this production is going, which has been the theme for Buffalo kind of all season. And I'm not about to take a strong stance here. The strong stance is that nobody can be confident or have a high degree of certainty in terms of predicting where their past production is going to go, which means if any of them are really low owned, especially in Showdown, you can take some chances. So that's just about it for the Kansas City defense. I think maybe the most noteworthy thing on the Buffalo side is how bad they have been against the slot. So we can switch from Buffalo here to Kansas City. Let me get Buffalo out of here. And we can go to alignment. The problem is, once again, we don't get a clear answer here. What I would like to see here is that there's a guy with a lot of slot usage whose slot yards per run is better than anywhere else that he aligns. If that's the kind of thing we see, we know we can go pretty heavy on the guy. The problem is, let's look at slot percentage instead. So Travis Kelce leads the way, but he's only in the slot 41% of the time. And his yards per run there, not great, 1.3, right? He's been better off the ball at 1.5. He's been better out wide at 2.1. Xavier Worthy spends a bunch of time in here, but again, 1.2 versus 1.5 out wide. DeAndre Hopkins, 1.9 to 28% of the time, 1.8 out wide. So there's not a ton here. Maybe Noah Gray at 26% of the time, 1.8 yards per run instead of 0.8 or 0.6 off the ball. So in line, he's at 2.5. That's 22%. So that might be a good spot for him as well. Like there just isn't a clear answer anywhere in this game. And you can see the same thing here, the DVOA, adjusted fantasy points against data, where Buffalo looks like a pretty good matchup across the board, plus 13% for running backs, plus 8% for wide receiver ones, plus 8% for wide receiver twos, plus 5% for tight ends. So they've kind of been good across the board. Bad spot for wide receiver threes. Maybe that's noteworthy. But, man, they really tightened things up this past week. In fact, if we look at let's go to rushing. Let me get rid of this. And let's go last week. The problem is we know a lot of this data is very specific to Baltimore. When you're playing Baltimore, what do you have to worry about? You have to worry about Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry above all else, right? Especially when there's no Zay Flowers. So when we look at last week's data for this Buffalo team, we can see that, yeah, you know what? They stacked to the box a ton. They had the highest stacked box rate of the week. That's not what I want. I want to go to defenses. Run types, defense. Show me stacked rate. Second highest at 16.7%. So they stacked the box a lot. They also played a lot of single high as a result. So let's go to coverage now, and you'll see we had a bunch of single high from Buffalo. They're usually a very, very zone heavy team. They only played at 51.6% of the time, potentially because they were playing more single high, and there was no Zay Flowers, so it was a little bit easier to cover. All of this is to say, I really don't have a high degree of confidence or a high degree of certainty in how Buffalo is going to attack this Kansas City team. I will bring up the fact on the season, they've been excellent against scrambles. So maybe that's an angle you can take. They have been one of the best teams at creating pressure without the blitz. However, most of the second half of the season, they haven't gotten home with that pressure. They haven't been able to turn those into sacks, which has kind of been the story for Patrick Mahomes in his career. He will get pressured. He's not going to get sacked very often. So, like I said, there aren't many leans that I have. Potentially the biggest one, though, definitely the bet that I'm most confident in for this game is an under on Pacheco. I'm not going to go to the under 32.5 rushing yards. I'm going to go to the under 41.5 rushing plus receiving. That's because, number one, we, of course, benefit if Pacheco's not getting the ball on the ground, which he hasn't much, just 5 for 18 last game. But this is what I really notice. In the last 4 games for him, 0 receptions, 1 target, 0 yards. 0 receptions, 0 targets, 0 yards. 1 reception, 2 targets, -1 yards. 1 reception on 1 target for 15 the game prior. 6 yards in the game prior, 5 yards in the game prior. No more. No more than 1 reception in all games except one. That Los Angeles game, he had 2 receptions for 6 yards. So just been really, really uninvolved in the passing game And that is not an accident. We can go to the receiving tab back here in StatsHub. Let's go to players. And let's start here in week 20. And let's just take a look at the routes run numbers for these guys. And you'll see why Pacheco is not very involved in the passing game. It's because he's not running that many routes. Pirine 8, Pacheco 8, Kareem Hunt 12. It's going to be hard to get many receptions when you're a running back who's not getting designed a thing for you and you're only running 8 routes. Didn't play there. Let's go back to week 17. So 8 routes, 13 routes in that one, right? Just not getting much. So heavily uninvolved in the passing game. And I will take that extra 9 yards and go to the under 41.5 rushing plus receiving. I think just like the Crowder over and the under on Zaccheaus, there's an element of they trust Kareem Hunt. They know he's not going to be dynamic, but they don't feel like they need dynamic from their running back. They just need him to get the short yardage conversions. Kareem Hunt definitely better in short yardage than Isiah Pacheco. They need him to get 6 yards when it's blocked for 6 yards instead of trying to get 20 and instead only getting 2. So I think they really like what Kareem Hunt has given them, even though he's not going to break any big plays anytime soon. So I like continuing to bet against Isiah Pacheco here. And Buffalo's run defenses look significantly better here in the playoffs than throughout the season. And part of that, by the way, I think is simply some element of just regression to the mean. And the reason I say that is because we can look at the adjusted line yards data. Let's go to the defensive tab and notice Buffalo. If we sort here by open field yards, they've allowed the second highest open field yards, the 24th highest second level yards, the 22nd most running back yards. This is all per attempt. But check this out. 5th in adjusted line yards per rush. So they're finally just tackling a little bit better. Milano's back, so that makes sense. And I think that also like this number is the more predictive one than this one. This is coming because they've allowed some explosives. But basically what it's saying is there maybe wasn't that much of a reason for these explosives to happen because they're defending the run pretty well in terms of just not giving up too much, and then they just need to make the tackle. Now that they are making the tackles, it's going to be hard, I think, for Pacheco to do much in this game. It feels like the under 41.5 is basically just betting that he doesn't have a 25-yard run or something like that. So I do really like the under 41.5. Fortunately, I think that's the only pick from this entire game that I really like at the moment. Let's see. Have they added anything for Ty Johnson? Because I definitely think, whoops. Yeah, we don't have anything on Ty Johnson yet. I do think he will continue to play a pretty big role here. But that might be it. That might be it for this game. On the DFS side in this game, I think I already have kind of said, this is a week where we're really playing the ownership game. That's true for the Eagles. It's true for Washington's pass catchers to some degree. It's extremely true, I think, for the Kansas City pass catchers. Last week, one of the reasons why we're all over Travis Kelce was that ownership was all over Worthy and Marquise Brown. If ownership is there again, great. I'll go right back to Travis Kelce and just hope that it's playoff time. Kelce shows up, and that's just going to be the way it is. But I think there's also like very much a possibility that Buffalo says, hey, we're not going to be beaten by Travis Kelce again. We don't respect the pass catchers yet. We're going to make these receivers beat us or prove that they can actually beat us. And maybe instead, this is the Hollywood Brown game that so many people hoped was last week. That's kind of my lean. My lean is that I want ownership to be all over Kelce. I want ownership to be all over Worthy, and I want very low ownership on Hollywood Brown, and I will take that lead because we did see him play quite a bit last week. In fact, let's close on that. Let's go just to week 20, Kansas City, and let's see what we've got from a route run perspective here. And sure enough, we saw 25 routes from Kelce, 24 from Worthy. No surprise there. Maybe the biggest surprise, Juju Smith-Schuster played 13 routes. Don't ask me why. Why are you playing Juju and Noah Gray more than DeAndre freaking Hopkins? why is Peyton Hendershot getting 5 routes and Watson getting 2? Put DeAndre Hopkins on the damn field. But there is a very clear second tier, if you will. That is Marquise Brown getting 20 routes. Also had a very valuable downfield end zone target, sailed over his head. But if he gets that kind of target more often, eventually he's going to hit. And that's the kind of thing we're looking for at low ownership and at a low price tag. So definitely hope that he is low owned. Basically no interest in the running backs. For showdown, maybe some interest in Kareem Hunt, just because I think he's definitely the most likely to score. Like I said, he's been by far their most effective rusher in short yardage. So I think he will be the goal line guy and might just get a couple routes and a couple receptions just because they like having him on the field. I believe that will do it here on the second last matchup show of the season. We will be back in 2 weeks for the Super Bowl. Go Birds.